My name is James P. Johnston. I'm an attorney practicing law in Wichita, Kansas. Today's date is November 2nd, 1996. I have with me today Mr. Robert G. Vinson, my client, who is here at my request to give us a statement concerning the events of November 22nd, 1963, both prior to that date, on that date, and subsequent to that date. Mr. Vinson, would you please, first of all, give us your full name?
My name is Robert Greal Vinson.
All right, and I understand that it is your preference at this time to not give your current home address. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you request that anyone wanting to contact you contact me personally prior to putting you into contact with anyone else?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Vinson, first of all, what has been your occupation during most of your life?
I was in the Air Force for 20 years, starting in 1946.
All right, let's go back and get a little personal information about you. Where were you born, please?
I was born in Headland, Alabama.
All right, and where did you go to school?
I went to school at Goodman, Alabama for the first up through the 6th grade, and then I went to Lockhart, Alabama until the 8th grade. Then I entered the armed forces.
And what branch of the armed forces would that have been?
That would have been the Army.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and just informally state what your career in the military, not just commencing with the Army, entailed in a chronological way?
Well, I first entered the Army in 1946 and served with them until 1947, November 1947. Then I entered the Air Force in March of 1948, March 17th, and I continued with them until September the 30th, 1966, where I retired from the Army. Then I came to the city of Wichita and took a position with Mobley West Jennings and Shaw as an accounting firm. And after I served with them from January of 67, to April 67, then I went to work for the city of Wichita. And I worked for them up until I retired in 1987 from the city of Wichita. And I've just been retired since then.
All right. Mr. Vinson, in your military service, did you have occasion to work overseas in your military capacity?
Yes, I was in Japan, Okinawa, and Korea.
What were your duties in Korea?
I was a first sergeant in Korea.
And
not Korea, I'm sorry, that was Okinawa. In Korea, I was a supervisor, what we call a chief clerk, which is orderly room.
And what year or years did you serve in Korea?
This was in 1952.
Was that during or after the so-called Korean War?
That was during the Korean War.
Now, in your military career, Mr. Vinson, have you received any particular awards which might be considered important from the standpoint of your military duty and ability?
Yes, I received the Air Force Commendation Medal and the Joint Army and Air Force Commendation Medal, which is a very highly recognized medal in the armed services.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, of course, you received an honorable discharge from the service, is that correct?
Yes.
And that would have been from the Air Force?
From the Air Force.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, you are married, are you not?
Yes, I'm married.
And do you have a family?
Yes, I have 2 daughters and a stepdaughter and a stepson.
What is your personal education achievement in reference to after high school?
I have a business degree from Kansas Newman College.
And that's here in Wichita, Kansas.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Vinson, do you also have a pilot's license, or did you have a pilot's license?
Yeah, I had a pilot's license. I took the training for a commercial pilot and for a pilot license, and then a commercial pilot training. And I completed those, but I never took the final examination to get my license because I had no use for them in the armed forces.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, directing your attention to the events of November 22nd, 1963, which, as you know, is the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Would you, first of all, tell us where you were stationed in the relevant time frame before November 22nd, 1963?
I was assigned to North American Air Defense Command in Colorado Springs. This was beginning of latter part of 1962 until 1965.
And was there a base there at which you were stationed?
Yes, I was stationed at Ant Air Force Base.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and tell us then, commencing at that point, about an experience which took place on November 22nd, 1963, but of course commenced prior to that date to lead up to November 22nd, 1963.
Well, prior to that, there had been some promotions made there on the base, and I kind of felt that I was entitled to one of them, and I didn't receive it. So then I requested a leave, and I went back to Washington, D.C., where it was on the 19th.
The 19th of November of 1963? Yeah. Is that correct?
On a Wednesday. Mm-hmm.
All right. And the purpose of that was to accomplish what?
Was to bring my personnel records before the Pentagon staff that was over the Armed Force or Air Force at that time, to show them that I had commendation medals, outstanding evaluations, and so forth, and to find out why I didn't receive one of those promotions at that time.
All right. So this was an effort to discover, as you said, why you hadn't received a promotion which you felt you deserved.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
All right. Now, at that time, where did you live?
I lived in Colorado Springs.
All right. Did you own a home there?
Yes.
You and your wife lived there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Tell us about then the experience of going to Washington, D.C. on November 19, 1963.
I left on a Wednesday afternoon and arrived in Washington, D.C. that afternoon about 4:30. I went into Washington and obtained a motel. Well, it was a hotel. It was on in the northeast section of town, fairly close to the Capitol, so that I could walk back and forth. And the next morning, Thursday morning, I got up and went over to the Capitol to see the congressman from my area.
And that was Congressman Jimmy Jones at that time?
Well, I had gone over to see the congressman from my home state, Alabama.
I see.
But they referred me to Jones, which was actually in charge of the Public Works subcommittee, I believe it was. And he referred me to a Colonel Chapman, which was my understanding. He was the liaison officer between the Congress and the Pentagon. And I was sitting by his desk, and he called the Pentagon and made arrangements for me to go over and talk to them.
And where was his office located?
It was there in the Pentagon. I mean, there in the Congress building.
All right.
It was downstairs, but I'm not exactly which floor it was on. I signed in Congressman Jones' office, And he looked at my, backing up, he looked at my records, and then he referred me to Colonel Chapman.
All right, and this Congressman, Jimmy Jones, I think we have discovered is currently, or at least was several months ago, the current ambassador from the United States to Mexico. Is that your understanding?
I'm not sure. I think that's what you told me.
Yes. All right. All right, go ahead. Then you're still in Chapman's office.
While I was in Colonel Chapman's office, at the time it didn't mean too much to me, but he received a telephone call. And I only heard his side of the conversation. I couldn't hear who the other people on the other line, on the other end of the line. He told this party he was talking to, he says, he said, we have information, and I strongly, highly recommend that the president do not go to Dallas. And he says, of course, the advance party from the Congress here has already departed, but I still highly recommend that the president do not go to Dallas. Well, I just passed it off at that time, and he told me where to go catch the limousine to go to the Pentagon. And I left there and went downstairs, and it was a tunnel that I went into, and there was a limousine there, and he took me over to the Pentagon. I went into the personnel office over there, and I saw a master sergeant, and he looked over my records, and he said, well, I'd like for you to wait a minute and have a seat over there. Then I saw him go into the office of a colonel. I didn't get the colonel's name, but he went in there, and he was in there for approximately 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, let me interrupt you there. Was this Colonel Chapman with you and in your presence all this time?
No, I was by myself at this time.
All right, well, I thought you referred to Chapman taking you to the Pentagon.
No, he made arrangements for me to go to the Pentagon.
All right, go ahead.
And then I waited there for about 15 to 20 minutes, and he came back out, and he told me, he said, he would like to see you. Speaking to the colonel. And I went in, and he'd had my file there, and he started looking through it, and he says, are all of these like this through your career? And I said, yes, it is. He said, okay, we'll look into this, and we thank you for bringing it to our attention. So then I got up and went back outside. And about 15 minutes later, the sergeant came out and gave me my folder, which I had took with me, and told me that they would be in touch, and things would be taken care of.
Now, again, this is in reference to your promotion.
Mm-hmm,
all right.
All of this. And I left. He said, well, you can go on back now. So I left there and went back over to the hotel. I went out and had dinner to a nearby cafe close by there, and went home and called my wife that night and told her that I'd seen Mr. Jones and what happened. And then I told her I was going to go out to Andrews the next morning to catch a flight back to either Lowry or Colorado Springs.
And Andrews means Andrews Air Force Base.
Andrews Air Force Base. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And the next morning I got up about 6:30 or 7, caught the bus. It takes you out there. I arrived at the base Andrews Air Force Base about around 7:30.
And this would then be what date?
This would be Friday, November the 22nd.
All right, of 1963.
1963. I walked into the terminal, and there was a long counter on the right-hand side, and I walked over to the airman there, and I asked him if he had any flights going to Lowry or Colorado Springs, either one. He said, no, we don't have any flights leaving here today. None booked out.
All right, let me ask you a question at this point. Had you made any previous arrangements to catch a flight back, or why did you just go to Andrews Air Force Base on an impromptu basis, more or less?
Normally they have flights going out of there to different parts of the country. And And usually we would have a shuttle run between Colorado Springs, which is NORAD, and Andrews. It was one on Wednesday, and I believe one on Friday, and different dates.
We meaning the Air Force?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, Air Force would have these flights to shuttle correspondents, personnel, dignitary personnel, and all to have flights going to these bases, since it was the command center for the North American Air Defense Command.
All right. Well, you as an enlisted person went then to Andrews without any prior reservation or arrangement, because it was customary for Air Force personnel to do that, to travel around the country.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Please proceed.
I might have even caught one in, say, into Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. You could go in there, and anything going out that could carry passengers, you could get on if you thought it was close enough.
So you would not have to pay extra for that?
No.
So in effect, you were kind of hitchhiking.
That's correct.
All right, go ahead.
I was hitchhiking. And I walked over to the passenger terminal where the airman was, and I asked him if he had anything. He told me no. I said, well, he told me to sign in first. I signed the log sheet there. And I said, well, since I didn't have breakfast yet, I think I'll go in. There was a little cafeteria across the hall. And I'll go over here and have some breakfast. I went over there and I ordered my breakfast. And it must have been about, after that, about 15 to 20 minutes. She had just brought my breakfast in. I heard my name on the loudspeaker to report to the passenger terminal. I went over there, and I figured they had something, and so I didn't finish my breakfast. I just went over there, and I said, you got something going on? He said, yeah. You see the C-54 out there on the runway? I said, the third one down? He said, yes. He said, go get on that. It's going to Lowry Air Force Base.
And
Colorado Springs. I meant not Colorado Springs, but Lowry Air Force Base, Colorado. And since that was only 60 miles away, I thought, well, this is a good ride. So I
60 miles away from where?
From my home in Colorado Springs.
All right.
So I went out and got out there. There was some steps in there already set up, and I saw one.
You mean to the entrance of the plane?
Yes.
All right.
And I saw one person walking around underneath it, like he was inspecting, checking it out. But he didn't have a hat on, and I didn't see any insignias, just a pair of coveralls. And I went ahead and crawled in.
All right, pardon me just a moment. Could you tell us something about the configuration of the C-54 and any particular markings that you remember being on it?
There was, well, the C-54 was a twin-engine cargo plane, which I had seen before, and it had, but the tail was a little bit different than what I was used to. And it had a marking on it. It looked like a world, the picture of a world, without all the different drawings, just plain. And then it had longitude and latitude white marks around it.
And what was the background color of this?
It was a dark, well, it wasn't real dark brown, but a brown color,
All right.
but with white marks on it.
Did you see any other emblems or designations on the plane of any type?
No, which really it was a little bit, I guess I did notice, because normally most of the aircraft had USAF written on the tail. This one did not.
All right, now you referred to this as being a twin engine. The C-54 was a four-engine plane, was it not?
Yeah, it's a four-engine.
All right, so you're correcting that.
Yes.
All right. So you could see no other designations or labels on the plane, and you proceeded to board?
Yes.
All right. Was anyone on the plane when you boarded?
No, there was no one.
All right. Then go ahead and tell us what happened after that.
Well, then another I was sat down not too far from the door where you get on, the cargo doors. And there was another gentleman came up, dressed in the same type coveralls, but he didn't have a hat on either. And they both got on, and it surprised me. They never said a word to me. They just went on up to the cockpit.
All right, now these men were dressed in coveralls?
Coveralls.
With no emblems or designations?
Of rank or anything.
All right, and was that unusual for the Air Force?
To me it was.
All right. And nothing was said to you when they got on the plane?
No, and that was unusual because normally the captain or whoever's flying the plane would say, "Hi, welcome aboard. We're going to Denver. Hope we got that nice weather." And they always had something to say to you.
All right, were these two men carrying anything that you recollect when they boarded the plane?
No, they were. And most of the time, the pilots would have a small briefcase for the manifest and for the other aerial photos, that they took with them.
All right.
And,
now, these men were Caucasians, were they?
yes, both of them were Caucasians.
All right. Go ahead and tell us then what happened after that.
Well, they went on up and closed the cockpit door behind them, and they revved up the engines. We taxied on out to the runway and took off. And we were headed toward Lowry Air Force Base, or at least west.
What was the approximate time that you left Andrews Air Force Base?
It was between 8:30 and 9, around 8:30, I think.
That would be p.m.?
A.m.
A.m. All right. Go ahead.
We left there, and I assumed it was around 12:30 because he came over the loudspeaker and said that the president has been shot. It was shot at 12:29. He told the exact time and everything.
So this is what you heard over the
PA system in the aircraft.
All right.
Then he did a complete 180 and headed south.
A 180 means what for lay people?
Well, that would be a turn to the left, which we were headed west, be a turn to the left 180 degrees, and headed south.
So that would be a rather abrupt left.
No, it was an abrupt turn.
All right.
And we went from that, or well, I didn't know where we were going, but we just kept flying, and it wasn't, I guess, about 3:30 or 4 o'clock right in that area. I noticed a big city down below me, and after looking it over pretty well, I figured it out. It was Dallas, Texas. And so, not knowing whether, at the time, not knowing where the president was at, I didn't know he was in Dallas. I just heard, he just told me that the president was shot, because I heard the colonel say, "I highly recommend that he don't go to Dallas." So,
this is back when you were in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Right.
So I didn't know, where he was there or not at the time. So we did a turn to the right, and then we made a turn back to the left and landed south of the south of the city of Dallas. The reason I know, I'd been there a lot of times, and I saw where they'd done construction and so forth along the highways there. I went to Houston a lot to see my grandsons. And we were there, or we stopped and we landed there and stopped for about 10 minutes, and during that time, 2 men came aboard.
All right, let us back up just a little bit. When you say your plane made a left turn of 180 degrees, actually, if the plane is flying west and makes an abrupt left turn, it would be 90-degree turn, would it not?
Yes, you'd be correct.
A 90-degree turn?
Yes, it would be, correct me on that, it would
All
be
right.
90 degree.
All right, then you say that you recognize the city as being Dallas. How did you recognize it as being Dallas?
Well, I'd been through Dallas a number of times, even during all the construction for Highway 45, and I'd been back before. I went out 75 all the way through, And Dallas is, once you've been through there, it's you get a pretty good idea of what the landmarking.
All right.
The buildings, you could see them real plain from the highway.
All right. Now go ahead and tell us again where or describe the area where this plane landed, this C-54.
It was south of Dallas along the Trinity River. We were on the south side of the Trinity River when we landed because there was trees and water back to the north of us.
All right. Go ahead and tell us what happened after that.
And then there was two gentlemen got on the airplane. One of them was about 6'2", weighed about, I imagine 200 or around 190, 200 pounds. He was wearing white, well, it was a beige-like coveralls. And there was another gentleman, he was much shorter, and he had black hair, kind of skinny, and I guess he would weigh approximately maybe 150, 155 pounds.
All right. Were these Caucasians?
One of them looked like he was Latin, maybe Cuban, and the other one was Caucasian.
All right. And were they both, these last two men you're describing, dressed in these beige coveralls?
Yes.
Any insignias or labels or anything on their coveralls?
Nothing other than a belt that tied in front here.
All right.
And it was a kind of beige color that they were wearing. The Jeep was a yellow type, looked like a road Jeep. They used on roads, repairing them, yellow. It was kind of yellowish color.
So this vehicle was sitting there on this, what to you looked like a road under construction.
Well, it looked like where we had landed was a road under construction.
Yeah.
And the Jeep was back up, maybe about 20 or 30 feet from the door when they got out.
All right.
And then they walked on up and got in. Jeep turned around and took off.
So there was another person who was driving the Jeep.
Driving the Jeep, right.
Who subsequently left.
Yes, he left. Well, in other words, he backed up out of my sight. I couldn't see him anymore.
I see. All right. So did you recognize either of these individuals that got on the plane at this point?
No, I did not know either one of them.
All right. Did you later see some recognition of one of these persons that boarded the plane?
Yes, I didn't recognize the larger one, but I did, after seeing his picture on television an awful lot, a person that looked like him, and this person that got on the airplane looked an awful lot like Oswald.
All right. But this came later after you saw Oswald's picture on the media.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So then the plane turned around and took off?
Well, we turned around and took off and were headed west.
Did anybody ever say anything to you up to this point on this plane?
No, they did not speak to me. They went on up behind the cockpit and sat down, and no one spoke to me, not even the pilot, or it might have been a navigator, I don't know. And one other thing that was interesting, that we didn't have a crew chief. Normally all Air Force flights carries a crew chief. But
in addition to the pilot and co-pilot?
And co-pilot.
All right. Now, where did the C-54 go?
We went to, I later found out, a place called Roswell Air Force Base in New Mexico.
All right. And you did I'm sorry, go ahead.
When we landed there, it was about dusk. It was getting late in the evening. And when we landed there, they just taxied over to the side, all four of them came back to the back, opened the door, got out, and took off. Never said a word to me. You have to find your way home or whatever. They just all jumped out and took off. And then I got off and went over to a building that had a light in it. That's why I say it was dusk. It had a light in it, and you could still see the outline of the building and all. But I went in there, and there was an MP in there. AP, not MP.
I'm
AP.
sorry, what's the difference?
One's air police and the other one's military police.
Thank you.
And I went in there, and he told me, he said, I said, how can I get downtown, or where am I? I first asked him, where am I at? And he says, you're at Roswell Air Force Base in New Mexico. And I said, well, I guess this is as far as my ride's going. I'll have to go downtown and catch a bus home. How do you get there? He said, oh, you can't go anywhere. I said, what's the matter? He said, well, this base was placed under alert, full alert, and said nobody can leave or enter. And I said, well, we just landed. He said, well, I don't know anything about that. He said, but you can't leave until the alert's over.
So how long approximately did you have to wait?
I waited from then. It must have been, I would say about 6 or after. I waited until 9 o'clock before he let me go. And then he told me where to go catch the bus downtown and catch the Greyhound to Colorado Springs.
Did this AP ever request identification from you?
No, he never did ask me anything.
All right. And no one else talked to you after the plane landed there at Roswell Air Force Base?
No, I didn't talk to anyone else.
Okay.
I did call my wife from payphone out near the gate. I'm not sure, I can't remember now where it was, outside the gate or inside. But I did call her and tell her where I was at after I found out.
All right. And so did you then subsequently catch a public bus and get transportation back home?
Yes, it was about 11 o'clock. They had a bus going to Colorado Springs. And I caught that bus, and I arrived in Colorado Springs the next morning about, must have been around 8 or 8:45.
All right. Now,
this was Saturday morning.
Mr. Vinson, what did you think about this experience at that point when you had arrived at home?
Well, at first I thought, well, we were diverted, you know, a most unusual flight, but we were diverted for some reason or another, and I just sort of passed it off for right then.
Did you tell your wife about your flight being diverted?
Oh, yes, I told her that over the telephone.
All right.
Because she thought I was coming into Lowry Air Force Base.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, we have here before us some aerial photographs, do we not?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. And you recognize these, do you not?
Yes, this is an area
Yes.
south of Dallas along the Trinity River.
All right, and in the upper left-hand corner, it shows 4-64, which we've interpreted to mean April of '64.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All right, and would you point again to the area where you believe this plane landed?
I believe this plane landed in this area right here.
Which you have just pointed to.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Because I was sitting on the other, the plane was going this way, and I was sitting on the north side then, or northeast side, and I could look out the window and see the skyline downtown Dallas. And when we turned around and went this way, and you could look out the window and see the downtown area on my right-hand side.
So as you came in, you were heading in what direction?
I was heading in southeast direction.
And when you took off, the plane was headed in what direction?
Northwest.
All right.
Northwest section.
Now, this particular aerial photograph also shows some other configuration of the Trinity River and the floodplain, which I'm pointing to now. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, the next aerial that we have here is dated January 4, 1964, and it also is an aerial photograph of the area where you say this plane landed. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And would you point again to the same area? You are doing so now.
This area here.
And this photograph shows the area to the northwest of where the C-54 landed of the Trinity floodplain. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Now I will show you two additional illustrations marked, the one at the bottom, 1963 Dallas, which is my description of the map. This is a city and street map of Dallas, and you have seen this before, have you
Yes.
not? Mm-hmm. And have you placed on this street map with yellow markings where the plane landed?
This area here.
All right, and you are again pointing to the area previously identified on the two previous aerial photographs. Now at the top is a Dallas 1995 map, and that is a description that I personally placed on there. And you have placed again the yellow line showing where the C-54 landed.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, have you any reason to doubt where this plane landed other than what you have told us here today?
No, I do not.
All right. Now, let's commence again with your return to your home by public bus from the Roswell Air Force Base.
As I stated before, I left Roswell about around 11 o'clock, and I rode all night. I got home in Colorado Springs, or at the bus station. My wife picked me up about 8 or 8:30, right in that area. It was after 8 o'clock, and I went on to the house. This was Saturday morning, and went on to the house and didn't think any more about it. And Monday I went to work, and nobody said anything or done anything. And we went through the holidays. I think we took a little leave and went to Houston. And
let me ask you this question at this point. When you saw over the television media or in newspapers, whatever, and saw this person who was identified as Oswald, did you then develop some caution or suspicion about this flight you had been on?
I told my wife, I said, you know, those two guys looked a lot alike, the one we picked up in Dallas.
Referring to Oswald?
Yeah, and she said, oh, it couldn't be. She said, you know, they shot him. And I said, well, you know, I kind of just passed it off and didn't bother me anymore.
All right. Go ahead.
Then, well, as first of the year, no, it wasn't too long after first of the year, all of a sudden I received a promotion and came down from Washington. And they went ahead and had a big filming and everything of the promotion and made a big deal of it.
Of your promotion?
Yeah.
And when you say they, who?
That was the colonel, one colonel and a General Latta, Colonel Burton, Captain Cole, and most of the officers there.
And now this took place on what base?
Ant Air Force Base.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
And then later on, it was about June, or around June, May or June.
1964.
1964. My neighbor came over and asked my wife, says, what have you and Bob done? And she says, well, I hope nothing. And he says, well, the neighborhood has been flooded with personnel wanting to know all about you, asking questions of all the neighbors. And she said, well, I don't know anything about it. She says, we haven't done anything, and as far as I know, there's nothing, to hide. Then there was a little later on, Captain Cole gave us some documents to read and fill out and sign. And at first I thought it was maybe just an update of my security clearance, because it was kind of similar, wanting background information and all the data on you. And I had a crypto clearance, which is the highest you could carry. And
you had this clearance at this time for what reason? Why would you have had a crypto clearance, as you put it?
I was handling top secret documents
for the Air Force.
For the Air Force.
For NORAD.
NORAD.
All right, I understand. Go ahead.
And then after this June encounter with a neighbor, we filled out these forms and gave them all the information. But there was one of the forms that my wife said she wasn't going to sign. It was the secrecy document that they wanted us to fill out, saying that you wouldn't divulge any information from here on regarding any military type operations or any knowledge that came to you that was determined to be secret or top secret. And she didn't want to sign it. And then I told Captain Cole, I said, why does she have to sign that?
I'm sorry, you told which captain?
Captain Cole.
Okay.
I said, why does she have to sign that? She's not wanting to sign it. He said, well, they have to have this information. And it doesn't mean anything other than just, you know, I guess he thought it was a security clearance too.
All right.
And so she finally relented and signed it. And I turned them in. And then November, I got another, just got a set of orders through the mail. I mean, through the office there, Captain Cole. He handled all of this.
This would be an Air Force order?
Well, I don't know where it was or not, because the order read that I was to report to Washington, D.C., and all I had was a telephone number.
All right. Now, do you have a copy of that order that you have just described?
Yes, there should be a copy there. Let's see, that would be... Yes, under instructions here.
All right, this document carries the number 10 in the lower right-hand corner. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's a two-page document?
Two-page document.
And this order then directed you to do what?
To report to Washington, D.C., and to call this telephone number when I arrived there.
All right, I'm placing this on the easel. Where was the phone number that you were told to call?
I believe it's right here.
All right. The printing is very pale on this, but you have the copy of the order in your possession, of which we've made this copy.
Yes, I do,
All right.
which is legible.
Yes. All right. And did you know what this was all about?
No, no one could tell me.
So you were to go to Washington, D.C. and call a phone number.
Just call this number, and then I would get further instructions from her.
All right. So when then did you comply with that order?
That was...
The order was dated November 25, 1964, in the upper right-hand corner.
November...
1964.
I believe I left there on Sunday after at Air Force Base, which was actually Peterson Field, where we flew out of. And I flew out of there on Sunday afternoon and arrived, I believe I arrived there that same Sunday afternoon.
Arrived at what base?
Andrews Air Force Base. And I went over to, went into Washington, D.C., and I called this number. And they told me to report to the first barracks after I entered the gate at Fort Myer, Virginia. And I reported there, and they told me that they signed me a room. A guy came in and signed me a room and said a bus will be here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock and you're to get on it. So
at that point, did you know where you were supposed to go on that bus?
No.
All right.
Still didn't know.
No one had ever, up to this point, given you any information about why you were ordered to go to D.C. and bivouac at Fort Myer or get on this bus the next morning?
No, I even asked General Latta. He said he didn't know anything about it. I asked Colonel Burton. He said he didn't know anything.
Now, these gentlemen were
my supervisors back at Air Force Base.
Right. Go ahead.
And I reported out there, got up Monday morning, took the bus. The bus left then, and there were some other gentlemen got on. And they were dressed, some of them in civilian clothes, some in uniform, some Army, some Navy, and we drove out to a place called Langley, Virginia. And when we started entering, somebody said, "Hey, this is CIA headquarters." So we drove on in. They stopped us at the gate, and the bus driver gave them a slip or something. I didn't get to see what it actually was. It was just a piece of paper. And he drove on in. We got out down there, and we were just kind of standing around, and a gentleman came out in civilian clothes, said, "Follow me," and took us on inside and took us to this one room. And
Was this in a tall building, a one-story building? What type of building?
It's about a two-story, I think it was a three-story building that we were in. And I believe this was on the second floor that we went to. And it was a pretty good-sized room. They took us in there and started. First thing we did was they started testing us with a written examination.
All right, up to this point, had there ever been any official information given to you or to the group that you heard identifying that as CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia?
No.
All right. Did you ever see, up to this point, any signs or guideposts or anything like that indicating that this was CIA headquarters?
No, I don't remember seeing any, and other than this is a restricted area, keep out. There's a lot of those signs.
All right.
And then this test must have been about 400 questions, and it dealt with, do you hate your father? Did you hate your mother? Did they beat you? And, just psychological, I think.
All right, they were written questions?
Right, written questions.
And you were asked to answer them?
Yes.
All right.
And it took about 4 hours to go through this whole test. Then that afternoon, they started our physical. And after about 5 o'clock, we finished. Of course, they took us downstairs and fed us at noon in a cafeteria. And about 4 o'clock that afternoon, we all got back on the bus and went back to those barracks at Fort Myer, Virginia. Nobody said anything. I think they were about as stunned as I was and didn't know what was going on. And the next morning, Tuesday morning, we got up and we went back out there on a bus that looked like the same. We went through some more psychological testing, and then that afternoon they kept giving us physical. This was a real tough physical they run us through. And then we went back in, spent the night again, went back on Wednesday. I believe that was the morning they gave me the lie detector test. I spent about 2 hours in there. And then I came out and spent some more time on another a short test, psychological test, I would call it. And then that afternoon, that's Wednesday, I took some more tests, physical, part of the physical. And then I believe it was on Thursday, we came back in and then went back. And then on Thursday, we had some more testing and finished up the physical.
What type of testing on this last day?
It was a written psychological type testing.
All right.
A lot of this was repeat, but the questions wasn't in the same order. They were switched around. Different areas would be like, did you hate your mother or how father, would be at the end of it. And first it would be at the first, and they would have them mixed up.
All right.
So then we went back Thursday night, and then on Friday morning, we went back out there, and we sort of hung around. We went to the cafeteria, had coffee, and then about 1 o'clock, they took us into this room that had a big U table in it, sort of like a horseshoe, And
So this would have been a large conference room?
been a real large conference room.
All right.
And they took us in one at a time, and there was individuals sitting around this conference room. It was dark. You couldn't recognize the individuals behind it. It was kind of dark back there, but you were out in an open area. They could see you, but a little hard to see them.
All right. Were these individuals around this table in any type of uniform?
No, most of them were civilians. There might have been one or two in uniform.
All right.
And they started asking me, would you like to go work with us? But they never did tell me who us was. And I told them no, I would not like to go because I had bought my home in Colorado Springs. I planned to retire there, and that I had a job lined up.
Did you know where they wanted you to go?
No, they never told me where this would be, other than they would like to. And I said, well, I own my home. Well, we can take care of that. I said, well, what do you mean take care of it? Well, you'll be compensated for it. And I said, oh, okay. And then says, now, are you sure you wouldn't like to go? And I said, no. They kept insisting that I would like to go, and I said, no. I want to retire in Colorado Springs. My wife wanted to live there. She thought it was a beautiful little city, and when we got transferred there, that was the greatest thing happened. And I kept insisting that I didn't want to go. He kept saying, well, we'll make it worth your while. And I said, no. I'd prefer just to finish out my term and no red. And so finally they told me, says, you know how to get back to the your bus station from the barracks? And I said, no, I don't. I said, so they said, well, you can go out here and there's a bus out there and he'll take you back and no, he'll take you to the airport, which was between Washington and Baltimore.
Which airport?
I'm trying to think of the name of it. Baltimore, it's a joint, Baltimore and Washington Airport.
All right.
It's south of Baltimore.
All right.
And so this bus took us up to another area and left us there. And pretty soon another bus came and picked us up and took us on over. Not all of us, just some of us. Took us on up to the airport. And I went in there and got a ticket. Now, I had a ticket. I took the shuttle there, and they had a ticket for me to come back. So I went in and got a ticket, or had my ticket, to catch the airline back that night. I think it left at 7 o'clock. And I got on it and went back to Colorado Springs.
Now, this airline, was it a commercial, public airline?
Yes.
All right.
Commercial public.
But when you received your orders originally to go to Fort Myer, was that by military transport or by commercial?
Military transport, the shuttle run I had talked about earlier.
All right. Now, during the whole time that you were in the CIA facility in Langley, Virginia, did anyone there ever identify themselves to you, either by name or identification tag or anything of that nature?
No, I just had a good idea where it was at. Since I had worked with the Office of Special Investigation over in Washington, D.C., over at Bowling Air Force Base, we received a lot of documents from them relating to background investigations, and I knew where it was at after they took me out there.
All right. The office.
But they never did tell me who they were.
All right. When you say the Office of Air Force Investigation, you worked in that office?
Yes.
And what did you do there?
I gathered documents for background investigations.
Of Air Force personnel?
Well, civilians and Air Force personnel.
And that would have been what period of time that you did that service?
That would have been in 1954 to 1955.
All right. And from that experience and the documents that came across your desk, you were aware that the Langley, Virginia facility was a CIA facility?
Yes, and they had a sign up outside that it said Langley, Virginia.
All right.
That's all it said.
That was on the highway?
That was on the highway.
All right. All right, go ahead.
Let's see, I was
You had just taken the commercial
taking
airliner.
a commercial flight home, and I arrived back in Colorado, and I thought pretty much everything was settled. That I told him I didn't want to go. I almost insisted I didn't want to go. Then, and my wife asked me, said, "How did it go?" And I said, "Well, I just kept insisting I didn't want to go."
Did you tell her about all of the testing and so on, interrogation that you underwent there?
Yes.
All right.
And then I told her, well, I said, maybe this is the end of it. And she said, I wonder if it has, I asked her, I said, I wonder if this has anything to do with the flight that I was on from Washington to Roswell Air Force Base. She says, if it is, don't say anything, because there's been quite a few people eliminated. And
Meaning related to the JFK assassination?
right, so this was just about a year later.
All right.
And I said, well, I'm not going to say anything. We've already, prior to going up there, we had to sign those secrecy documents. And I said, I'm not going to say anything about it. In February, here I get a set of orders.
February of what year?
Of 1965.
All right.
I get a set of orders, and they were directing me to report to Las Vegas, Nevada, and had a telephone number.
All right. And do you have a copy of those orders here?
Yes, I believe.
All right.
Yeah, this is a. Yeah, it's dated 23rd of February, 1965.
All right. And
Advised me to report to Las Vegas, Nevada, and gave me a telephone number.
I placed this document, which carries the number 11 in the lower right-hand corner. Is that correct?
Yes,
And this is the order to which you've just referred.
right.
And interpret it again for us. What did it order you to do?
Report to Las Vegas, Nevada, and it has a telephone number there to call when I arrived.
All right. And did you know what facility it was in Las Vegas, Nevada, or did you have any other information when you received these orders?
No, I did not.
All right.
But since I had been to Langley, I kind of felt that it had something to do with them, or the CIA.
All right. So what did you do upon receiving this order?
Well, immediately I put my house up for sale. It gave us so many days to report there. And a couple came out and looked at it and says, okay, we'll take it. And says, we'll make arrangements to meet you at the First National Bank. I believe this was on a Sunday, and about 3 days later. And we met them over there and signed all the documents. And
All right. How long was your house on the market for sale?
about 1 week. I just got it in the paper.
And so it was sold very abruptly.
Yes,
All right.
immediately.
And the people that bought your house, do you recall their names?
No, I don't. I guess the First National Bank would have their names, but
All right. As far as you know, they weren't connected with any government agency. Is that correct?
well, I didn't think they were. No.
All right. In any event, you sold your house very rapidly. What about the price on the house?
There was no dickering. They paid what I asked.
I see. So then what happened to you and your family or wife?
Well, Captain Cole told me that he was a kind of a liaison man between them and me. He said, well, this company will be out there to pack you and take care of your household goods. Says you don't have to do a thing. Just leave everything in where it's at, except take what personal items you want to take with you. I said, well, how long is it going to be before we get these items? He says, they'll be waiting on you in Las Vegas by the time you get there.
So all of this was handled for you?
Yes, taking
The
care.
selling of your house, the packing of your personal clothing and
Well, no,
items?
I run an ad in the paper to house for sale, and gave the address, And whenever this couple called and said they'd like to come out and see it, they came out and they said we'd like to have it. And then I'd financed it through the VA and the bank, First National Bank, was handling the loan on it. So all we did was go down there and sign the documents and turn it over to them. I had all the utilities cut off and everything.
All right. So then you moved to Las Vegas?
Yes, we left there then to go to Las Vegas. When we got out to Las Vegas, I called this number, but I didn't get an answer. So we got a motel, and I kept calling this number, but no answer. And we got a little worried about what's going on. And later in that evening, I called it again, and this guy told me, he said, told me another name of a motel to go up there and sign in, and all expenses would be taken care of.
You're still in Las Vegas?
I'm still in Las Vegas.
All right, go ahead.
And this I did. I went up there and signed in at this motel that he gave us the address and name of. And we were there for about 3 or 4 days. And he said he'd get in contact with me. But I never received any message. And about 4 days, he finally contacted me and said he would be at his home there in Las Vegas at 7 o'clock Sunday night.
Was this an Air Force officer?
I didn't know who it was at the time. But when I got out to his house, I found out it was an Air Force Senior Master Sergeant.
All right.
And he's the one that told me that this, where I would be working and where it would be a CIA project.
All right. That's the first information you had as to where you were going to end up.
Right.
Okay.
And that my wife would be living in Las Vegas, and where I could find a house real reasonable for rent, and when to go up there, and how to get there. He says they'll have your name at the main gate in Mercury, and then each gate thereafter they'll have your information on you. So you just drive on through and they'll show you where to go.
All right. When you say Mercury, you're referring to a little town in Nevada.
North of Las Vegas, Nevada. I guess about 40 miles up there, around 35, right. 40.
And so did you then end up at a base out there?
Yes. I went up that Monday morning after I went over to his house, and they took a picture of me there in Mercury. It was Atomic Energy Commission, has an office right there at the gate, and I was to report in there. And I went in there, and they took a picture and gave me a badge. And then I went through their test site, part of it. There was another gate. This guy took that badge and gave me another one. Then I went on to another gate and another gate. I had 4 or 5 gates. Did
they exchange badges at every gate?
Each time.
Each time?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Then I wound up at a place looked just like an Air Force base, except small. It had some housing, little housing and they didn't have any barracks. It was all housing, and with rooms in them, made for personnel.
All right. What then type of planes did you learn were flown out of this base?
Well, when I first reported in, they gave me a briefing, and they told me that this was a home of the U-2 spy plane, and that they were now using the Blackbird, which is the SR-71.
All right.
And that's what the project was all about.
And did you see those planes then as you worked on this base?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. We have on the easel another map This one depicting the state of Nevada, is that correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And I'm pointing to Las Vegas here in the lower right-hand corner. And would you point to the approximate area where you think this base was located?
This base was located in this near Groom Lake, right on Groom Lake, and there was two ways out. One this way, coming down through Mercury and going out, and you could go out the back gate if there was some testing going on here. If you had to, go home for any reason.
And you have placed a yellow mark there showing
and there's
the
a road leading out to that road there.
All right.
And without an aerial photo, this is about as close as I can come.
All right. Now, what were your duties on this base?
I was the administrative supervisor for the base supply.
Did you ever receive orders confirming your location there?
No.
All right.
This is a sort of when I retired in when I retired in September of 1966, this is my retirement orders, and it shows an address and post office box in Bowling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. It has no reference, as I can tell, of Las Vegas or any other area around there. I'm just referring to.
And this retirement order, which I'm holding up at this time, it has the number 12 in the lower right-hand corner.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just to identify it. And again, this document does not refer specifically to this base that you've just described.
No.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, did you serve out the remainder of your term at this base that you've just described?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have any further interviews concerning your experience of November 22nd, 1963 by any person while you were still in the Air Force?
No.
Then, upon your retirement and discharge, where did you go?
I went to Long Beach, California, where I took a job with a CPA firm.
You lived there for a while?
Well, from September until January.
Of what year?
Of 67.
And then where did you go?
I went to Wichita, Kansas.
Why did you make the change?
I had an offer from a CPA firm here in Wichita, which was Mobley West, Jennings and Shaw.
All right, and then so you moved here and worked here in Wichita, Kansas.
Yes, I worked for them until March the 10th, I believe, March the 8th, when I found that the city of Wichita was looking for a person, and I went over and filled my application out and took a job with them.
Doing what?
I was administrative supervisor down at the maintenance facility.
All right, for the city of Wichita.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Now, Mr. Vinson, when did you cease that employment with the city of Wichita?
I retired from the city of Wichita in, I believe it was 1987, after 22 years and so many months of service.
And now, following that retirement, where did you go?
From Air Force or from Wichita?
From the Wichita employment. Did you stay in Wichita for a while?
Oh, yes. I stayed in Wichita until 94, November of 94.
And then you moved out of the state where you reside now?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Vinson, what was it that prompted you to come forward with the story of the events that you've just described for us?
I didn't say anything due to the fact that I'd signed those secrecy documents for all that period of time. it was on my mind, but I felt that I better not, until I read in the paper where that they had released all the documents that the CIA, not all of them, but a big percentage of them.
All right, now
30,000, I think, or something like that, of the Kennedy assassination.
All right, you're referring, I believe, then to the legislation that was passed by the Congress and signed by President Bush, creating the Assassinations Record and Review Board.
Yes.
All right, and upon reading and learning about that, did you make any inquiry of anyone before you made any public statement about your experience?
Yes, I first talked to Larry Hatterberg about it.
And who is he?
He worked for Channel 10,
Here in Wichita.
KTV. Mm-hmm.
All right.
And I told him my concerns about the secrecy part of it, and he said, well, I'll check into it. And I guess he called Congressman Glickman and talked to him about it, and he told him that it would be all right. He saw nothing wrong with it, but due to the fact that legislative document pertained to the release of that information.
All right, now at that time, Congressman Glickman was head of the House Intelligence Oversight Committee, is that correct?
He identified it, that's what he was in charge of.
Did you ever talk to Congressman Glickman personally?
Yes, he called me and asked me if I was concerned about that, and I told him yes, I was. And he said, well, don't worry about that. He said, I'll take care of it if anything comes up in regard to that. He said that should be public information now, as far as we're concerned. And I thanked him, and then I met with Larry Hatterberg, and he had some girl working for him. They did a story in Hatterberg's People, and then they did a TV interview, and that's when you saw
Yes.
from the TV interview that I had with Larry Hatterberg.
Right. Now, the Glickman you're referring to is the current member of the President's Cabinet and the Secretary of Agriculture. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's the same Glickman.
Same Glickman.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, just one or two other questions here. When you were describing the individuals that got onto the C-54 after it landed in southern Dallas in the Trinity floodplain, you referred to one of the individuals that seemed to resemble Oswald. Which person was this?
He was a short one. He was probably 5'6", 7", right in there. He had black hair.
And he was a Caucasian.
A Caucasian.
And the larger man that you said weighed around 200 pounds.
He was Latin descent, which I would say more. He was more Cuban than the others. A lot of them they're pretty good size. The other Latins that I know or seen or anything to do with are a little shorter.
All right. Now, Mr. Vinson, this information and these statements you have made here today, are they true?
True to the best of my knowledge and belief.
And do you say that under penalties of perjury?
Yes, or whatever.
All right. Now, you have requested that I file a Freedom of Information Act request on the CIA, did you not?
Yes.
And I did that, did I not?
Yes.
And you have not yet today been informed by the CIA that your records are going to be produced. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct.
All right. They have acknowledged the request, but nothing else has happened. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's right.
And that was over a year ago.
Yes.
Mr. Vinson, I don't have any further questions of you. Are you willing to testify under oath to these facts that you have just stated?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
There was one other question I wanted to ask you, and that would be whether we had requested the secrecy document. Document pertaining to the secrecy. And before we agreed to testify to this, that we would want to see that first, wouldn't it?
Yes, the actual confidentiality agreement you and your
Yes,
wife
so
both
that-
signed.
So that we could make a determination where I should really testify or not, right?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you for inserting that.